Everybody, welcome back online. We're going to get started. I think we have some people who are still filtering back into the room, so hopefully you can all hear us. I'm going to first ask our speakers to speak up because some of the folks in the back of the room here were having trouble hearing before, so if everyone can speak up. And yes?
Can people also repeat their question?
And when you do a question, if you can repeat your question and speak your question loudly, I think the folks can hear the questions on the web, but maybe not as well in the room. Great. Okay, so we're moving on, and we're going to be talking about creative fundraising online. And I think I'm going to make Tom the most popular person at lunch when I say that he has raised over $150 million online, and everyone probably would like to do the same. So in his spare time, Tom is vice president at LMG, a public affairs firm in D.C., and he has worked on the Carrie Edwards campaign. He led their digital strategy. He's also worked with nonprofits and for-profits in the campaign world. He was one of the key principals in D.C. at MoveOn.org, and Tom is someone who knows so much about digital strategies that we are just thrilled to have him. And he is going to announce his panel, where they're going to do, I think, a little bit of panel conversation, walking around, a combo platter, if you will, right, Tom?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm going to turn this over to Tom. And the other question, I think, from the Boston group, they had asked if we have any examples of nonprofits and successful nonprofits. And I know that we have Remind.org here and how nonprofits have been successful in social media. I think the Boston group would certainly love to hear that.
Great. Thank you very much to Comcast for putting this together, and I'm very happy to be here. I think this is very important that you guys are coming together and talking about this for a couple of reasons. New media, as we've talked about already, is moving, social media so much faster than the kind of curriculum of how to practice it. And so it's important, I think, as we go forward, as the NGO community in particular goes forward, that there's a community of practitioners and executives who are supporting practitioners that comes together and is able to share best practices and talk with each other, because that's ultimately where that curriculum will come from, is from people saying, here, we did it this way, or we did it this way. And putting together a panel on fundraising on the internet, I wanted to make sure we were covering kind of different classes of nonprofit organizations. Because really, the spectrum is pretty broad. I've worked with organizations that had literally millions of people on their email lists, and you could staff a fundraising drive that raised tens of millions of dollars with 2 or 3 people. That is a rarefied situation in the nonprofit community. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 organizations out there that have more than 1 million people on their email lists. And if you are one of those organizations, it's a fantastic place to be in. But there's many other organizations which might be in a different position. On one end of the spectrum, you have what I'll call small community or nonprofits. You might have a staff of 5 to 10. You have an active board of directors from the community who are really invested in what your particular mission is. Maybe you're running a community center. Maybe you're running a job training program in a particular part of the city. Maybe it's something very local. And there's a set of strategies that are probably right for that organization. Or maybe you're an institution like a university or a museum or a school that has a community that's larger. Maybe you have tens of thousands of alumni. Maybe you have a website that gets a lot of traffic, especially if your team is in the Big East, for example, here in Philly. Or maybe you have some other way that you are already getting a lot of attention because of the size of your institution. And then there's a whole spectrum of organizations in between. And there's a different strategy that might fit each of those different ones, and we'll talk about some of that today. The number one rule, and I'm going to give Deborah the marquee spot on this panel. The number one rule, though, in online fundraising is that if you want to raise money, you have to ask for it. And there's lots of people who they set up their website, they have a successful launch of their website, and then they sit back and they go, well, where's the money? We're expecting the dollars to just be rolling in. As you know, those of you who are on some of these big email lists, the asking of the money part is a very active component of the online strategy. You might be getting emails all the time asking you for money. But other than that, there's what you do to raise money on the internet is integrated with your entire online strategy. Everything you do. The community building, your audience building, your content, all of that is connected back to it. And those are the fundamentals that are going to be unique for your type of organization. Our two panelists here, who I'm going to ask to speak, have kind of different experiences they're going to offer you. Deborah Rosen is Senior Vice President for Creative Services at M&R Strategic Services, which is, anyone here familiar with M&R? Well, for some people in the back. M&R Strategic Services for the kind of large national nonprofit organizations is probably the preeminent online strategy consulting organization. So we're talking about AARP.
Yeah.
Save Darfur.
HRC.
HRC. Did you guys have the Red Cross?
No, the Wilderness Society.
Wilderness
Those are
Society.
online clients.
So these are they're online clients, for example. And Deborah has a very good methodology, which I think applies to the entire spectrum of organizations that I talked about. And so she's going to walk you through that, and which I think will be really helpful to you. Renee Bardorf is the executive director of the Bob Woodruff Foundation. We all know Bob Woodruff from ABC News, and we all know about his advocacy now on behalf of wounded warriors. And Remind.org, which is a project of the Bob Woodruff Foundation, is what I would say is an early adopter for online fundraising over Twitter, in their project tweet2remind.org. And so this is going to be an interesting case study to look at, and you've raised more than $100,000 in just a few months.
Yes.
An interesting case study to look at how kind of emerging technologies like Twitter might be able to be applied to a fully developed campaign that includes public awareness, offline fundraising, and what part of what you'll talk about is also the traditional media and how then it integrated with your adaptation of technology. So with that, I'm going to ask Deborah to get us started.
Hi. Thank you. I'm going to grab the clicker. I actually have a client here, too, based in Philadelphia, the Juvenile Law Center. It's very exciting to have someone local. Oh, good. And then I just press. All right. So I'm sure that many of you have learned your own lessons in online fundraising, whether that's through running your own program or testing out some of your own strategies, sending an email with a soft ask or a hard ask for money. The biggest lesson that I think we've learned at M&R is that the most effective online organizing programs are those that, whether it's advocacy or fundraising, I'm going to talk about fundraising today, but it applies in both directions, is to make your program a campaign. Make each one of your advocacy appeals and your fundraising appeals part of a campaign, part of a larger story that you're telling about what you're doing on that particular issue. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, specifically, how to make a campaign. And I'm going to give some examples of sort of, of effective strategies for that. Where do I point it? The first thing that's important is to have a plan. You want to make sure that you're not just going to, it happens often that an opportunity will come up, your organization has been mentioned in the news, something exciting happened on your issue, and everybody just sort of gets excited and says, let's send out an email. And that's great. Sometimes you'll raise some money from that. The best opportunity, though, is when you really sit back and think about your plan for how you're going to take advantage of that moment. One-off fundraising appeals might raise you some money, but you're going to raise a lot more money if you have a several message strategy. So you want to have a plan where you really think through, how many messages am I going to send as part of this campaign? What is going to be the theme of each message? Who is going to sign each message? How much money do I want to raise? How many donors do I want to get? Really have that all in place before you even start your fundraising campaign. You want to tell a really clear story. I think we all work with organizations that have issues that are complex, right? There's so many different nuances of policy and legal issues, but you really need to be able to break your story down for normal people like this, right? It's got to be that simple, good and bad. Spoiler alert, this is a much more complicated story, right? Like, but you really have to be able to, for your donors, for prospective donors, be able to articulate who is good, who is bad in this situation, and how do you be part of the good guys with your organization. Does that make sense? And again, it can be way more complex than this. You want to make it urgent. The internet is a medium that really lends itself. The internet is all about sort of what's happening right now. So when you're sending an email to your list, if it doesn't somehow reference what's happening in the real world at this moment, it's not going to be relevant to your online audience. So you want to make sure that even if you're running in the middle of your campaign, even if you've already drafted all of your email appeals and you're ready to go, if something is happening in the real world, don't be afraid to change the first few lines of your message so that it reflects what's happening right now and will really get someone's attention. And that could be anything. It could be something that's happening in Washington, D.C. It could be something that's happening at the state capitol. There was a news report today about your issue. A new study came out. Whatever it is, make sure you reference it as part of your campaign. You want to make it personal. People give to organizations that evoke some sort of emotional response from them. And here's a good example of one. This is an image from an Oxfam America fundraising appeal that we did. And we used this text as the lead to the appeal. Can you imagine being hungry enough to eat sawdust or grass? This was a lead for a fundraising appeal for Oxfam America that did very well. We tested several different versions of it. This particular version was very effective. It really draws you in as an initial sort of, as the intro to the message. But you really want to figure out what is the way that your issue connects to the personal lives of the people that you're trying to reach, and make that a big part of how you lead them in. And then you want to make it easy. If you've crossed that hurdle of getting someone to open your email and then getting someone to click on a link in your email, you want to make sure that they land somewhere that it's easy for them to make a donation, right? The say in the web world, we say you want to have a fundraising form or an advocacy form. Same is true either way, above the fold, meaning you don't have to scroll down to find out what you're supposed to do. You want your fundraising page. This one is for the National Campaign for Fair Elections. You want your fundraising page to also, the content to reflect whatever they saw in the email message that led them there. So, that's one of the things that people are looking for when they click on a link and land on a web page. Is this what I expected it to be? You want it to be very, very clear. Does that all make sense? Great. So I want to talk about one particular case study of a fundraising campaign that we worked with the Human Rights Campaign to do. Does everybody know who the Human Rights Campaign is? For those that don't, they're the nation's largest LGBT advocacy organization, and we've been working with them for several years. The campaign that I want to talk about specifically is a membership drive that we ran with them in 2008. It's called 2008 Year to Win. And the reason why I'm sort of bringing this as the example is it is an excellent, excellent example of how to take a fundraising campaign and integrate it across every different medium that you have to really maximize your results. So, just to give you some background, before the Year to Win, HRC had a different online membership program or drive they would run. It was linked to their direct mail program, so they would send every month, they would send 2 emails that were tied to a direct mail piece. You would get if you were on the online list and getting the direct mail, you would get an email saying you're about to receive a fundraising appeal in the mail, and you could make your donation online. That might be easier for you. And then after the mail piece would have dropped, you would receive another email saying you may have just received this direct mail piece, and we can help make it easier for you by making a contribution online. They would do 2 end-of-year prospecting appeals to the full list and 1 standalone membership appeal, and they would raise $123,000 from their list online with these strategies, which is great, right? It's a nice sum of money. But we wanted to try a different strategy. So in January of 2008, we decided instead of launching these emails every single month, let's take the entire membership program and make it a campaign at the beginning of the year. And that was sort of what formed the 2008 Year to Win program. The goal was 2008 new members, 2008 renewing members, all by January 28th, 2008. And then so that was the campaign goal, how much they wanted to raise, what the deadline was. I'm sorry, not how much they wanted to raise, how many donors they wanted to get, what the deadline was. And then they connected it to what was happening in the real world. In January of 2008, the election was just kicking off. They wanted to make sure that people really associated what was going on with this campaign and why it was so important to be a member of HRC at this particular time. This is a copy or example of the landing page. It included a thermometer so they can measure you could see how close we were to getting to the goal, and more information about sort of the campaign. So we did a whole bunch of different tests with this campaign. We tested premiums. One of the premiums was a hat. As you can see, the hat had it was a real, marginally better response rate. The truth is in the tests that we've done for fundraising appeals that include some sort of gift, it doesn't improve your response rates all that much. People want to give. If you can make a good case for giving, people want to give to your organization. They're not doing it because they're getting a hat or they're getting a T-shirt. Although that's nice, it doesn't necessarily online translate to a huge difference in response rates. So we tested that. We tested a whole bunch of other strategies around the messaging that we were using. And the sort of great thing about email is you can know right away what message works and what message doesn't, so you can apply it to the rest of your appeals, or you can test small sample groups and find out, well, what works better to roll out to the full list. This was a lapsed member test, so we emailed everybody on the list whose membership was about to lapse. The test that sort of made it very clear that your membership was no longer active definitely performed better than the softer make your membership make sure you're still a member next year. And so we rolled that out to the larger list and incorporated it into future messages like this one. Or we also found that the red text was that was another little trick that we found in this campaign, that red text was alarming and helpful. But so we, again, like I said, we took that message and incorporated it into the rest of the series for the lapsed members in this campaign. It sounds counterintuitive, but the best time to ask someone for money is when they've just given money, right? So one of the strategies that we've employed in fundraising campaigns is once someone has made a contribution, we'll send them a thank you, and then we'll invite them to become part of a sustainer program. You've just made a contribution. You can go ahead and keep this going. Would you make a $10, $20 contribution every single month? Commit to that right now. And that was a very effective element of this program as well, and a really great way to sort of beef up the sustaining giving numbers. There were a total of 6 messages that were part of this series. And I want to sort of take a second here. The first 2 messages, the series was over about almost 3 weeks, a span of almost 3 weeks. And this was just for this campaign. Not every single member of the list got every message. There were some suppression files, so people that did give, we didn't ask them to give again. Or people that were prospects in the file, we suppressed them from a couple of the messages, so we didn't over-message them on this campaign. But as you can see, a lot of organizations, I think, they'll send out one appeal and then that's it. As you can see from this, if we had just sent out the first, or maybe the first 2, we wouldn't have the first 2 combined didn't raise as much money as the ones toward the end. And this is a very typical continuum for an online fundraising campaign, particularly one that has a deadline. The closer you are to the deadline, the more money you will raise with that particular appeal. I will say another sort of strategy that we found that was effective for HRC, but for many of our clients, message 5 was sent over a weekend, and message 5 was one of our best. We also, so during this, during our fundraising campaign, things were actually happening outside in the real world. It was January of 2008. There was an election going on. And we didn't want to necessarily not incorporate any opportunities for people to engage with the Human Rights Campaign outside of the membership drive. So when an opportunity came to send an email that was not a fundraising appeal, we jumped on it. It was a great little opportunity for the Human Rights Campaign, but one of the candidates had made a comment about the issue, and it was Mike Huckabee, who had said he would meet with Ryan White's mother, and then had never sort of fulfilled that promise. So we engaged the HRC list in emailing him and asking him to fulfill his promise to meet with Ryan White's mother. But it was a great opportunity in the middle of that campaign to energize the list of people that didn't feel at that point part of the other messaging that was going on. So if they're committed to the organization, they want to be part of what you're doing, they're just not prepared at this point to make a donation. People that did take action on this campaign then landed on a fundraising page that was part of the membership drive and related to this particular issue that did raise money. The one thing to keep in mind about a campaign is a campaign really should permeate every aspect of what you're doing at your organization. Every public-facing page, everything that has your organization's logo on it should be talking about the campaign. It should be synonymous with your identity during that period of time. So you don't want to leave any stone unturned. And here's a couple examples from HRC. HRC has a monthly newsletter. We made sure that in the monthly newsletter there was a fundraising ask as part of the newsletter. There always is. But in this particular one, we made sure that it was related to the campaign. And it raised almost $5,000. Again, money left on the table or left off the table. On the table, off the table, if you don't ask. We also made sure that the campaign was talked about on the Human Rights Campaign blog and in the holiday card that HRC sent to their members. In fact, in this one, we didn't even ask for money until we had a PS on the bottom saying, go ahead and renew your membership, which raised almost $6,000. We also made sure that the website, HRC's main website, reflected what was going on with the campaign. That's really helpful because if people click on a link in an email and they get to the page and they're like, I'm not sure, I want to do this, or they see another thing and they want another link in the navigation they want to check out, and they navigate away from your fundraising page, you want to make sure that if they go back to the home, it's right in front of their face what it is we initially wanted them to do. It's also good for people that are coming from a direct mail appeal they might have received. It's a good way to sort of direct them to the right place to make their donation. The other thing we tested was a light box. It's kind of like a splash page, except you can see the main web page behind and sort of shadowed, and then, well, I guess it's the etymology of the light box, and then the light box is sort of brighter in the front. Didn't raise as much money. We didn't do this for very long. It was just a few days in the campaign because it can be annoying. I'm sure if you've gone to websites and seen these things pop up, your sort of instinct is to click, turn them off. So we did it only for a few days, but it did raise almost $6,000. And then we made sure that every other sort of social networking or any other opportunity that we had to connect to people in the real world was also talking about this campaign. We made sure that Twitter was talking about the campaign, YouTube, Facebook. HRC has a text message program. Also made sure that that was communicating what was going on with this campaign and asking people to give to the membership drive. And in addition to what was going on online, HRC is really, really good at integrating their online and offline fundraising messaging. But we made sure that the offline, the direct mail, was also sort of saying the same thing as the online appeals. Same message and then the same imagery as well. All of these things sort of working together have a whole bunch of different benefits. The first, of course, is you're picking up money from a whole bunch of different places, and maybe it's only a little money in each place. But the other thing that I think is beneficial about leveraging all of these assets for a campaign is that it almost validates the campaign in a way, right? Because so many different parts of your website, so many different parts of the online world and offline world are sort of have a cohesive, consistent message, which is really useful. And then as far as results, this sort of gives it away a little bit. So our goal was to have 2008 new members, 2008 lapsed members renew. We actually reached our goal pretty fast and then set a new goal of 3,500 new members, which we also reached. So in 2008, the year to win, we had 20 different total versions of emails, and that there were some emails that were customized, depending on what your relationship to HRC was. Were you a member, a lapsed member, an activist, a prospect? We ended up raising over $500,000 in this membership drive, a much more effective strategy to run this campaign than the way that they were doing their membership program before. Yeah, and we were going for 2,008 donors. We got over 4,400 new donors with this membership drive, and had over 5,000 renewals. And it was, some people, I think that there was, it was a great time to do this. It was a great time in the sort of election, with the election calendar. But we did it again in 2009. 2009, we had another membership drive, employed the same exact strategies, modified them to sort of fit a new message, right? The new way forward, not the year to win, but the new way forward. Had some more different, more different versions of emails, raised almost $100,000 more in this particular membership drive, and then had a very similar number of new donors, but then really were able to engage more renewals, I think, as part of the continuum from the 2008 campaign. So that is the HRC example, and a great example of an online fundraising integrated campaign.
Great. Thank you, Deborah.
Oh, right.
Well, don't go away just yet. I want to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah.
I want to ask, so, all right, this is great. HRC, for example, they already had an email list.
Yeah.
So what if you're an organization that doesn't have an email list? Or is it, what is the strategy? Is it, we have to spend the time first to build one, and then we can do the big program? What do you tell your clients?
Well, you need a list. You need a list to ask a list for money, right? So you do need to spend a little bit of time building a list. I think that I wouldn't say that you need to build a list up to a certain point before you can even ask for money. I would say you want to figure out, as you're building that list, what is your engagement strategy for advocacy or non-fundraising opportunities to engage with your organization, which are an effective way to build your list. What is your strategy, and how is that going to integrate to fundraising? So you might start with launching advocacy campaigns around legislation or around other sort of policy work that relates to your organization, and then start having people land on fundraising pages, small campaigns with a few messages asking people to make a contribution on the issue that you're campaigning on.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll do more Q&A at the end of the entire panel. So.
Great. Thank you.
Next, I already introduced Renee Bardorf. Yeah, come join us over here. She is the executive director of the Bob Woodruff Foundation, and Remind.org and tweet2remind.org.
Yes.
And now you had some video, but I want you can just cue Scott whenever you're ready. Okay.
Let me just give you a little background. For those of you who are not aware, I'm the executive director of the Bob Woodruff Foundation. We started the foundation as a result of injuries sustained by Bob Woodruff, who had just taken over the anchor desk at ABC News from Peter Jennings, who had passed away. Unfortunately, Bob was on a trip to Iraq and sustained, like many of our service members do, a roadside bomb impact, which resulted in a severe traumatic brain injury that put him in a coma for more than 30 days. He was medevaced out of the combat zone to a hospital where our military members are treated in Baghdad. Within 45 minutes, he had his skull removed in order to help with the swelling of his brain. He was then medevaced again, like all of our service members are, to Germany, and then returned to Bethesda Naval Medical Center and received his acute treatment there. While he and his wife and his entire family were there during Bob's recovery and his coma, they got to meet many other service members who had sustained similar injuries, but didn't have quite the opportunities that Bob and Lee had. For instance, flying on a private ABC jet to get to the hospital and spend taking time off from work and having resources that would enable Lee, his wife, to stay at the bedside. So many of our service members and their families live on dual incomes, and many mothers and fathers and spouses are giving up their jobs in order to come to the bedside of their service members. So Bob and Lee felt like it was very important for them to give back. And so we started the foundation, the Bob Woodruff Foundation, in order to support injured service members and their families, particularly in that gap where we have a transition from active duty service back into communities. And so what we needed to do was figure out, how do we fill this gap where government is not, where government is losing track of service members and maybe not as effective in supporting them? How do we empower the community back in a grassroots level in their hometowns to get this support when there's so many other challenges in a community, specifically the economy that everyone is so distracted about? How do we keep them focused on service members and their sacrifice, and then ensure that they have long-term successful futures? So what we did is we partnered up, and many of the folks today have talked about thought leaders. We're a unique organization. We have 4 full-time personnel on our staff. We're very, very small, but as far as our scope and our name recognition and the way people view us, we are a national organization that impacts the lives of many, many service members and has pushed a message out nationally, but very, very small in infrastructure. And so most of you here in the audience are dealing with that same thing that I'm dealing with. How do you actually pay a consultant to come in and to help you with all of these fundraising things that you have, especially in this economy, and still keep your fundraising dollars low, keep your administration low, so that when you're reviewed by organizations like Charity Navigator, you're spending the most dollars on programs and the least dollars on fundraising and administrative costs. It's a challenge, really, as a new organization. We've only had our 501c3 status for a year, a little over a year, and it's a real challenge for us to build our reputation in the nonprofit sector and keep those percentages where we need to have them. So I know that all of you are struggling with the same things we are. So what we did is we've brought together a lot of thought leaders. We brought in J. Walter Thompson, and they are our pro bono advertising agency of record. Wonderfully, we've had the assets of traditional media and the networks like ABC who have helped to support us. And we have a PR firm in D.C., Porter Novelli, that assists us as well as many other nonprofit support that we receive from pro bono partners, which is really critical to keeping those percentages low. So we developed the Remind.org brand. And what it is, it's about reminding the American public of those who serve, those who have been injured, what their injuries are, specifically those hidden injuries of war, like traumatic brain injury and combat stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, injuries that people do not see as service members reintegrate back into their communities, and the general public doesn't realize the kind of support that they need. So it's about reminding people of our responsibilities as citizens to successfully reintegrate them and ensure that they have long-term success. So we built this Remind brand, but what we realized is that we really needed to build a movement. And as others have talked about today, a movement really begins with young people. And young people, that 18 to 24-year-old person, may not have the money that traditional supporters of the troops have, but they certainly have a voice, and they have a way to spread a message. So the challenge for us was, how do we create a movement where we can bridge a gap from those who traditionally, the more conservative folks that traditionally support troops, to that younger, hipper, more socially inept or socially savvy group of folks can help us push this message. So Porter Novelli helped us come up with the Tweet to Remind campaign. And really when we started it, and I'll play the first video in just a second, when we started this, it was about creating a dialogue with young people, asking them questions such as, who is your hero? Tell us about a service member you know. Talk about your peers, because really that 18 to 24-year-old is the population in Iraq and Afghanistan that is also being injured. These are their high school schoolmates, their college schoolmates. Talk about that. Create the dialogue. And as we did that, obviously, one of the challenges that all of us face is how do we raise money also while spreading a message and creating dialogue. So we came up with the idea to also fundraise with Tweet to Remind. There were a lot of challenges, and after we show the video, I'll tell you about some of the lessons that we learned in doing that, because it's a sort of a two-part process. You have tweeting on Twitter, but then you also have to have the means to fundraise, which is not included within the Twitter environment. So you have to create a microsite where you collect the donations. And so we did that, and we decided that we would ask everyone for $1. And we would do it over Memorial Day. And really that over $100,000 that we raised was really over just Memorial Day. We asked people to come out, and we said things like, if someone risked their life for you, would you give them $1? If someone risked their life for you, would you buy them a cup of coffee at Starbucks? Questions like that. Start that dialogue, get people talking, spreading the message. What we also did is we found out who were the biggest Twitterers out there? Who were the celebs that really had a voice? And could we tap into them? Could we use our contacts within traditional media to try to spread the message and get more people tweeting on behalf of this cause? And we were fairly successful in doing so. I think we could have been a whole lot more successful, and we will when we relaunch it over Veterans Day. But what I'll do is I'll show you how the first video will be a video that we went out on Times Square, very inexpensive for us to do, just with a hand cam, and we asked people to talk about the Tweet to Remind. And then we put it on YouTube, we linked it back to our microsite, and we tried to get that word spreading. So this is the first video that we put together.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Someone like you is in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Watching, protecting, serving, so you don't have to.
Right now, they're there for us, for all of us.
Right now, no matter what you think about this war.
Good, bad,
indifferent, impassioned.
It's not about the war, it's about the warrior.
Right now.
When he or she comes home.
Injured, broken,
different.
Needing us.
Make sure we're there.
Help us build a home front that is ready for our wounded soldiers.
Service members.
Veterans. Families.
Right now. Remind a friend.
Remind a neighbor, a parent.
Someone you love.
That freedom has a cost.
There are wounds we see and wounds we don't.
It's up to us to heal the wounds of war.
Would you give someone $1 if they risk their life for you?
I would.
I would.
I will.
I gave 10.
I can. I did.
Right now, it's up to you because it's up to us.
Go to remind.org and donate.
Find us on Twitter, Tweet to Remind,
and Facebook. Pass it on.
Pass it on.
Pass it on. We can do this.
We can do this.
We can do this.
See is that we're trying to talk to this young audience who may not agree with the policies that brought us to war, but can support the warrior, that it's not about the war, it's about the warrior, and we want to spread that as citizens we still have a responsibility to care for these young injured men and women, regardless of whether or not we agree with the policies that brought them there. And therefore we bridge a gap between those who traditionally support wounded and veterans and those issues related to service members, and those who don't typically support the war, but they do support social issues related to the injury sustained in war. So that's why we did this, not about the war, about the warrior. So one of the other things that that we learned is that this here was an experiment. You saw we wanted to raise $1.6 million over Memorial Day weekend, which was to equate to that many have served in Iraq and Afghanistan who have volunteered to serve and gone over and been deployed. In our case, it was an experiment, which really led to our next strategy, which is to relaunch it over Veterans Day. We've had 1,500 people watch the YouTube video. Let me see my facts here. We've had 1,900 people join us on Twitter as followers, and another 1,000 follow us on Facebook, just in the time since we launched Tweet to Remind. And we really were able to do it for free, actually, because we had the pro bono support of J. Walter Thompson, Porter Novelli, a lot of thought leaders within the social media scene in order to advise us and to continue to advise us. So, so let me just talk to you a little bit about some of the lessons that we did learn, because you know we didn't meet our goal. But we did raise over $100,000 really in a weekend through asking for very small donations from a group that doesn't typically give. One of the things that we know that we made a mistake with was that we used PayPal as a source for payment, and that was an unreliable source for payment for us. And people were frustrated by using PayPal. So this time, I think what we would do is twofold: have a merchant account and just push people to our remind.org website. So two things happen. They have a very reliable source of giving. We already have the fulfillment covered on the Remind website, so we can get our thank you letters and tax receipts and things out. But then we also get people thinking more about the issue and exploring the remind.org website, which what happened with Tweet to Remind is that people really stayed within that microsite and didn't expand beyond into what the real issues are on remind.org and how you can take action as a citizen to help our wounded and just get a little bit more in depth. So, so definitely the merchant account PayPal was not a good thing for us. We really decided to do this within 2 weeks before Memorial Day. So again, it was sort of the experiment leads the strategy in this case. And what we didn't do was do enough prep work with a lot of bloggers to get out there and talk to the military bloggers, get people jazzed up about going on there over Memorial Day, and really making a plan and a strategy to ensure that we got the kind of numbers and exposure that we needed to. We got a lot of traditional media, and the next piece you're going to see is how we utilize a combination of traditional media, which is really where Bob is from, and his colleagues, and then combining it with social media. But what we underestimated was that those who watch traditional media are not typically your Twitterers. And they didn't know how. They wanted to make that leap, but they didn't know how to tweet. And it was too complicated for them, for the mainstream media to get that message out and teach someone how to Twitter at the same time. Since the conflict in Iran happened, luckily we have a whole lot more people on Twitter, and so when we relaunch it in Veterans Day, traditional media will really help to drive traffic to Twitter, I think, and certainly to Facebook, because we've seen a lot more traffic just on those sites since some of the international issues that have happened. We didn't know how to maintain the momentum. We were willing to do Memorial Day all the way through to Veterans Day, but we weren't sure how to maintain that momentum. And again, that went back to we hadn't built the relationships, I think, with the bloggers the way that we should have. It was too small a window. We started 2 weeks before, and we said Memorial Day. So then everyone thought, well, it ends on Memorial Day. And we didn't keep it open-ended enough to continue to grasp them and then let it grow organically. And that's what we need to do, probably run this through Veterans Day all the way through to Memorial Day and have goals associated with that. What Deborah was saying is, you know, have those goals, have them be large goals. You know, 2008 memberships, have it relate to the date, so on and so forth. We've been advised that actually 1.65 million wasn't enough to ask for, that it has to be this number way up here because otherwise people will think, oh, they'll get that easy. I don't have to participate because they'll get that easy. You don't get it easy. It comes slow, and it's got to grow organically. So again, maintaining that momentum was really a key. Also, we asked for $1. We should have asked for more than $1 because when it came to PayPal, we wanted it to be, you know, anybody can give $1. But the fact is, people don't want to use their credit card for only $1. And so we needed to ask for more than $1. And then we also promoted on the site who our big donors were. So then if you were the small donor, you still didn't feel as important as somebody like Demi Moore, who was tweeting on our behalf and gave, you know, a couple $1,000s. Then the $5 donor still doesn't feel like his or her donation is significant. And then finally, the one thing that Deborah mentioned that was a big mistake of ours was that when you pushed to remind.org, one, PayPal was the problem on the Tweet to Remind site. But when we pushed people to remind.org, our donation page, the action, the ability to take action was below the fold. And actually there was a paragraph above the fold that said, thank you for connecting to the donation site, you know, and telling you a little bit about our mission, but it said thank you. And so people thought, oh, great, they've already said thank you. I didn't have to do a thing. And they've said thank you to us already. So thank you was above the fold, and the means to donate was below the fold. And so we've since switched that around. But really simple things that don't cost a lot of money. So when you're like we are, and dollars are just so scarce right now, and you really have to continue to maintain those percentages, this stuff is really important. So the next thing we're going to do is just show how we combine traditional media, which is really where Bob and Lee's expertise and colleagues are, with our social media, which is where we're starting to create this movement. And we're combining both an audience that is a more traditional audience that watches traditional media, supports the troop, flag waving, so forth, and a young, hip, remind.org, tweet to remind audience of young people who will be able to push a message into local communities so that we can ensure that their peers are supported and successful for the rest of their lives. So this is sort of the highlights of that. Their responsibility is to reach out to these service members.
Of ABC now is one of the co-founders of the Bob Woodruff Foundation. One of the main things we want to do is have people pay more attention to those that have come back from the war injured.
Wounded ABC newsman Bob Woodruff is joining us in a few moments' time. He's hoping that you'll help his cause this Memorial Day weekend. He's using Twitter to help raise funds for injured service members, vets, and their families. So tell us about this program for Memorial Day. Tweet to remind, Lee.
Well, we're harnessing the power of Twitter to garner some help from all Americans.
Bob and Lee Woodruff are going to sit down with Mark at the Exchange and talk about how you can use Twitter to help benefit soldiers injured in Iraq.
Bob Woodruff, along with his wife Lee, are here with us at the New York Stock Exchange to talk to Americans of the hundreds of thousands of men and women who served their country that are teaming up with Twitter.
Our goal through Twitter is to raise $1.65 million for each of those men and women who have served.
Where do we go on the web?
tweet to remind.org and you sign up through PayPal, or just go to remind.org and you can make a donation on our website.
This is a campaign to get you involved through Twitter to support our troops. Tweet to remind. What does that mean?
If someone risked their life for you, would you give them $1? And we're asking people to go on to Twitter and to tweet to remind. This is a great way to make people aware through our Remind campaign of their responsibilities to reach out to these service members.
Because we have become this face and voice, I hope, for our troops who have put themselves in harm's way for us. So,
Bob Woodruff's life changed when he was severely wounded covering troops in Iraq. Today he is healing and helping them. One way with tweets, those messages sent through the website Twitter. Woodruff and his wife Lee are behind this campaign, Tweet to Remind.
Joining us now is marketing expert Marianne Salzman, who's with Porter Novelli and has worked on several top Twitter campaigns.
Now, we've launched Tweet to Remind with Bob and Lee Woodruff to raise money for their foundation over Memorial Day weekend, just asking people to put up $1 or $5 and send out tweets to support wounded warriors.
Also tonight, Wounded Warriors, reaching out to vets via the net. Julie, how do you use the web?
I've mostly used it to reach out to my friends and to get them joining the Facebook group for the Bob Woodruff Foundation.
You know, I think if one person's life is improved, those that have come back from the war with injuries that are visible or invisible, then this is all completely worth it.
We're going to open up to Q&A. Actually, what's that?
Apparently you've got lots of questions online already.
All right. Scott, could you actually pull up the question slide there that I gave you? Sure. And that was actually a really great example of how you can use new media strategy with also some celebrity to get coverage. We all know how to, the trick of the celebrity whenever you have that opportunity. But what we're also seeing is a lot of people using a new media strategy as the news hook to get the coverage. And that's part of what's been successful about their project and something that everyone can take back as a strategy you can apply to your organization. You can say, we're on Twitter, and suddenly you get some cachet. Is it going to lead to big results? Well, that's about your strategy and what your investments are in it, etc. Here's some questions I pulled up, but I think we already, it seems like we have probably some questions floating. There's a couple I just wanted to highlight, though, from the questions I had brainstormed on. Should I stop offline fundraising and replace it with online fundraising? And I answered that parenthetically, please no. The online fundraising is still a minority of most people's fundraising budgets. And there are few organizations that have been successful at large-scale online fundraising. But for NGOs, it's still a supplement, and that's something important to keep in mind. But let's go to what questions folks in the audience here or on the internet or on Twitter might have. In the back, go ahead.
Hi, this question is primarily for Deborah about email campaigns. I sort of oversee our email communication list, and I personally find that people are more likely to unsubscribe when we send multiple messages with the same content in a relatively short period of time. So my first question is whether or not you saw higher unsubscribe rates when you were doing campaigns, and number two, if you figured it was still worth it even if there are higher unsubscribe rates.
Yeah, did everybody hear the question? No. So I'm gonna paraphrase and tell me if I get it wrong. When you run a campaign with multiple messages that sort of all have the same theme, do you see a higher unsubscribe rate, and is it worth doing it given those unsubscribes? And I would say that you will see during a campaign, you'll probably see slightly higher unsubscribe rate. I think that organizations that we've worked with where we've seen really high unsubscribe rates are those that only send fundraising appeals and don't offer people other things to do. So in addition to asking people for money, you want to find other opportunities for them to engage and be part of your organization. And really, as part of that plan, think through, how the flow of communication is going to go from the user perspective over the course of the year. This month we're going to really focus on getting people engaged in an advocacy campaign and doing things that are not fundraising. And then next month we're going to flip over and ask people to make a literal investment in the issue and in the organization. But I think that where you see the higher unsubscribe rates is when you start sending people communication that isn't useful to them. So it's a lot of fundraising appeals and then just randomly sending news articles that you think are great, all that kind of stuff. If you don't give people another way to engage with you, is going to raise your unsubscribe rate and lower your open rates. Eventually people will see your name in the front line and say, they're just sending me another article, or they're just sending me another fundraising appeal, and not open your message.
In general, the rule is, if it's a useful email, people will be happy that they received it.
Yeah.
George, did you have a question from online?
I have a question online. It's from several folks, same question. Megan and Deborah both ask, what didn't work, this is for Renee, what didn't work about using PayPal specifically?
Maybe actually we can all step over here just so the camera guys.
Sure.
Deborah, you go.
Yeah. What didn't work for PayPal was typically the credit card processing. There were several credit card issues, having to use multiple credit cards to try to process. There was a limit to the amount of money you could donate via PayPal, and it just constant complaints about the system being down, and the multiple credit card piece is really where most of the issues came from.
And I have one other question that I can get to. This is from our group in Boston at City Year. And this is for regarding HRC, and it asked, did the HRC effort just front load fundraising? How many more total members money did HRC get in 2008?
How many?
How much more?
How many more?
Well, you had described at the beginning of your presentation the first.
Yeah.
The first campaign way they were doing online fundraising.
Right. Their initial fundraising membership drive brought in over the course of the year about a little over $120,000. This particular fundraising campaign brought in over $500,000. It definitely raised the number. We raised more money that year, but definitely way more in a membership drive with that particular strategy. Does that answer?
So the strategy worked.
In short, yeah.
Right here.
Kay Keenan from Big Brothers Big Sisters. Are any of you incorporating text to give in your tweeting campaigns, and can you just talk about that a little bit, or in any other social media?
I have not used text to give, and that's actually a great question. We should also ask our keynote speaker this afternoon at the end, and I'll mention him now for all of you and also for the internet audience, so you stick around. Andrew Bleeker, who was on the Obama campaign, because as many of us know, the Obama campaign invested heavily in text technology as one of their biggest innovations during the campaign, probably. But I'll ask Deborah, Renee, if you.
We have not used it. We really, again, we were learning how to tweet ourselves, and learned a lot about using hashtags and trying to capture not just the fundraising but the dialogue, and trying to spread the word, and using the hashtags in order to do that. So this time, that's something that we might take a look at.
Yeah. We've had clients incorporate text to act or text to give as part of large rallies. So the Save Darfur Coalition at the rally in D.C. and the rally in New York had a text to message the president and a text to give. Oxfam America has done the same. I think at this point it's still a little early. The learnings are not as substantial quite yet. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is really the user doesn't know what that means necessarily. It's the person who's just joining Twitter for the first time, and in our case, we were using traditional media to try to generate actually ended up generating a lot more business for Twitter and getting people to sign up for Twitter by using so much traditional media to push it over into the social media scene. But so many people didn't really understand what the hashtags meant and how to pass it along to their friends in an effective way that helped us.
One thing I just want to add, what we've seen over the last 10 years is that as the adoption of certain forms of technology, new media, social media, whatever, have progressed, they've also then paralleled in their adoptions and applications to nonprofit strategies. So in the late 90s, as e-commerce, like Amazon.com, took off, that's when you started to see online contributions through web forms start to become used by nonprofit organizations. And as e-commerce developed with email as a form of marketing, that's when email started to develop as a form of nonprofit fundraising. So think about, where are people putting their credit card in on the internet? And as all of us know, it's primarily when they purchase things, airplane tickets, shopping, etc. And so that experience is something they're familiar with, and it's something they're willing to replicate for a nonprofit. And so the thing to track and keep an eye on is, what will be the familiar experience that people have over the internet that could have a nonprofit fundraising implication. I actually think for the iPhone App Store could be one of the next places that you see a development for nonprofit fundraising, when nonprofits develop their own application that through the purchase of it, people will get, they'll raise money. And so that's something to watch, I think, in the next 2 years probably.
So, Renee, I wanted to mention, we've got Keenan D. Wilson on Twitter, and he's already retweeted and trying to raise money for you. He's asking for everybody to give $5.25.
Oh, great.
And put your, but he also has a question, which is a similar question that Camille has, and it is, how do you raise, for smaller firms without a huge budget and without maybe the help of a PR firm, how do you actually make these social media campaigns work with a small group?
Well, we are a small group, actually, and that's what people don't realize, is that it's not that hard, actually, to get PR firms, even smaller boutique-type PR firms, interested in your mission and what you're doing. It takes asking. You have to go out and you have to ask, and you have to be willing to ask for the pro bono support. And it's really a win-win for the agency and for yourself. So it does help to have a PR agency. But honestly, the celebrities that we had tweeting on our behalf really came organically. We had no connection to Demi Moore. She's just a fanatical Twitterer, and it just so happened she saw it. She saw the media, the traditional media pieces. Again, I think that what we capitalized on was pushing people to Twitter. The story became about the troops and Twitter, and even less maybe so about our foundation, but we ended up with a win-win because we got our message out. So I think you can still do it. It is the wonderful thing about social media is that you can do it with a small staff of 4, which is what we have, and we had 0 budget to do this. So we asked someone for their help. They actually said yes. We had Marion Salzman is a trend spotter, and she's fabulous, and she's brilliant. And we sold her on our mission, and she said she'd come on board. It's about making contacts and going for the ask, and then actually taking action.
Can I just add one? I would say also for small nonprofit organizations, and we do work with many small nonprofit organizations. One of the, maybe you could tell the story about how Move On started, but like most of these organizations start because the people that are in the organization reach out to their personal contact files, right? That's how Move On started. It started with an email. The subject line was actually Move On, about the Clinton impeachment hearings. And it was a message sent just to all of the people that the people that started Move On knew, and it eventually moved on from there. And there were a whole bunch of different strategies to sort of making that possible, right? Sending an email to every single person that you know, giving them that ask, and then asking them in the email to forward it to every single person they know, sending them a standalone message saying, please forward this to every single person you know. I think that you really, it's definitely possible to get going for small organizations to be successful at fundraising online, whether it's through an email campaign, social networking. I do think, though, that you'll benefit most if you combine all those strategies and have them running simultaneously.
I think it's an important question for you guys, as most of you as executives, somehow in your organization. You will have potentially somebody in your organization or a stakeholder nearby your organization who has social media savvy and aptitude, and it might be doing it on their own time, and that's the person you want to pull into the mission of helping you figure out social media strategy. That aptitude is something that there are people out there who just have it from their own interests and their own hobbies, etc. So if you have some of those people in your circle, pull them close to you and help them, empower them, give them the resources they need. And I think we have time for one more question. Sorry.
Go to a university. We have people from universities in this audience. Really, this is a millennial thing. So all these college students are having such a difficult time getting employed. You can bring them into your organization, help them to build their resume. You can pay them a little bit, but you can also use their savvy on social media. They've been doing it for years now, probably before any of us in this room have. And that's what we did. We brought in a wonderfully brilliant young 20-something that is, Twittering and Facebooking all day long, every day for us.
We actually have to wrap now, but wanted to thank everybody.
Yes, and before we go, can you give your Twitter handles so that people can tweet you and ask questions if they didn't get a chance to ask them online?
I'll have to post. I'll have to post mine for you.
Ours is just tweet to remind.
Tweet to remind.
And, at Tom Matzie, at TOMMATZZIE.
Terrific. So we're going to sign off online right now, and we'll be back with you. Maybe we can take some more questions later when we come back, or at the end of the day. And we're going, and then.
And let me just add, remind_org is a handle for us.
Yes, terrific. Okay.